Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Backstage edition. This is not a normal Backstage because today we have many things happening. Today we're talking about Giulietta, about rear, about the passion for automobiles. And this is also the chance to use this Backstage to launch the exhibition that we created in collaboration with the Registro Italiano Alfa Romeo on Giulietta, which celebrates 70 years this year. So, by entering the museum, you saw an empty hall, and it will be full of the vehicles that we will present today soon. And they will be on exhibition until the end of October. The Registro Alfa Romeo, the Alfa Romeo Italian register, doesn't need an introduction. They created a second museum today outside the real museum on the track, and I would like to give the floor to Armando Keller, the president of the register, to welcome you to this exciting day. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be here once again collaborating with the museum. We are creating, I believe, a collaboration, a twinning, which is very interesting. So today, in the home of every Alfa Romeo, we have organized our event, Real Alpha, which celebrates its third edition and starts to have a history with a beautiful anniversary, the anniversary of an incredible model which signs the start of Alfa Romeo after the war, so the Giulietta, which celebrates 70 years. It was an emotion to see on the track all the models, and now we're going to talk about the backstage organized in the museum. We're going to talk about Giulietta. Our members brought these beautiful cars that you will see outside and also inside during the exhibition. So being here is being at home, so I'd like to thank Lorenzo Ardizio once again because this is our home. I hope you enjoy the day. Thank you, Hermano, for this beautiful introduction. Now, let's talk about the details of the exhibition and let's start talking about the Giulietta. And we couldn't talk about the Giulietta without watching this video. A helicopter delicately landed in the middle of the city, and we were amazed seeing, coming out of the helicopter, Romeo and Juliet. So this strange Easter parade took place at the outskirts of Milan, and it was an incredible campaign that Alfa Romeo used to launch the Giulietta Sprint, the new car that, due to its power, maneuverability, and beauty, will be able to satisfy all the drivers. And I would like now to ask Carlo Fugazza to join me on stage, and Emanuele Prignacca, who for the Alfa Romeo register will help us and will tell something about these cars. Please, Emanuele. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I see many known places and some new places. I'm happy to be here. And I also owe a debt towards Alfa Romeo and my Giulietta. It was also a moral thing to do. And talk about Giulietta, let's start from the origins. The origins of Giulietta are to be traced way back, and we know it very well. So during World War II, many things were happening, the future was unclear, and two lines of thought were formed in Alfa Romeo. Some thought, like Wilfredo Ricard and part of the planning team, and Ricard expressed it very well in a letter, saying, I strongly believe that Alfa Romeo should do what Switzerland did with watchmaking, use complications. So use a complexity that we are only able to do and become one of the symbols of the automobile industry in the world. And then there was another line of thought who thought that Alfa Romeo should simplify and become popular. So a car which was nicknamed Marameo 350, it was a 350, which appeared in several versions, was in the plans, but then war came to an end, and the 1900 started production for the first time. In mass production, 18,000 were produced, more than Alfa Romeo did in its 40 years of history. And on the other side, the new project of the new history, the Giulietta, which would transform Alfa Romeo in a big automobile industry. So the Giulietta was born in a quite linear way from the mechanical point of view, because it was decided that it would have been very traditional in terms of mechanics. So it would have mounted a light alloy engine. At the beginning, they were thinking about doing 1,100 cc's, but then in order to avoid overlappings with other Italian offerings, well, they studied a 1,300 version. And then a very known anecdote leads to the coupe and sprint versions appear before the sedan, because there was a need to suddenly start the production of a few cars. The sprint was way ahead in design, planning, and bodywork, and in particular in Alfa Romeo. Well, Ivo Colucci was responsible of the bodywork, and Ivo Colucci talks about the Cooperino. So it reminds of the Giulietta Sprint shapes, but it was thought by making it less refined. So several car repairers and car bodyworks were asked to do projects, and the Giuliettissima of Bertone was the one which was chosen. So as the model you see here is also exhibited at the museum, and that's the embryo of what in 1954 would have been presented as Giulietta Sprint, with the launch April the 11th at the Portello, which we saw with the helicopter and Romeo and Juliet impersonators, at the Turin Saloon, and then a series of presentations, and this will be one of the topics of the exhibition, which will have a wall dedicated only to that, to the launch of Giulietta, which will become the girlfriend of all of Italy. So before presenting the specific model, well, Emanuele, the Giulietta Sprint is the origin of a long history of cars. And after the launch in Turin, Alfa Romeo had to stop orders because the orders reached the peak. Yes, they thought of collecting 70, 80 orders, but they reached 700, 800 orders. So the success was huge, and also Bertone was not able to produce all these cars. Many of these were produced in a artisanal way. And for example, I found by cleaning it the femur of a chicken. Why? Because the plate benders and beaters had their pocket lunch, and probably this worker ate the chicken and left the bone inside. So I found it and I left it, as it stayed for many years. And then the pre-series, of course, had several characteristics. They were differing one to the other, and then little by little there was the evolution, and the first series of the Giulietta Sprint was produced. It was a beautiful car. I had this pre-series one with many details that were different to the others, like the aluminum hoods, for example. It was a car which had a huge success because it was beautiful. And talking about beautiful cars, for these first months, we will have this beautiful Sprint on exhibit. I would like the owners to come here and tell us something about this model. Something that makes this model special and unique to you. Good afternoon. Every time we buy a car, it has to talk to me. So when I saw it, it talked to me. From Perugia, it came to Ferrara and gave us lots of satisfaction. It's the only close one because we only have cabriolets, but it's a beautiful car. And now my husband will tell you about the prizes and the awards that we won over the years. Well, this car was awarded the most important prize, the Concorso Real Alfa, which is the highest level competition for the Alfa Romeo cars. So 2 years ago, it was given the Best in Class award. And then at the Salvarola competition, which took place last year, apart from Best in Class, it was awarded a Best Leather Upholstery and a Sellerini Award as Best Status of Conservation. So we are jealous about this car. We love this car. We maintain it perfectly. It is never outside. We give the utmost attention to this because we think that we should maintain it perfect, and we think it's an important model that should not be left to the wear and tear. So we have also this task, which is a pleasure to us. Thank you. Since they didn't do it, but Anna Maria Rossetti and Simona Tanari, you did introduce yourselves. Thank you for participating. So now you will find the car outside the entrance of the museum. After the sprint, finally, even though with a delay, the Giulietta sedan was presented the next year. Well, you can start the car. Again with Romeo and Juliet, who this time were better dressed. They had a Giulietta covered in flowers, and in this case, the Giulietta is the daughter of Alfa Romeo bodywork. But after the 1900, which anyway is a very expensive car, a difficult car, it was the first car, as Lorenzo said, with an important bodywork and done in series by Alfa Romeo. The Giulietta represented a more accessible car, even though it maintained a sports car characteristic. It allowed it was a middle to high class and bourgeoisie to own this car, because the Fiat 600 was the elite, but the Berlina, the Giulietta Berlina, the sedan, could be used for a family, but it was nice to drive, and that's why it had an incredible success. So the Sprint was the first one to be launched for the reason that we explained, and then the sedan arrived. If I can add a personal memory, because due to my age, I saw these cars not only as a collector, but as a kid. My father was an Alfa fan, so the first car that I remember after the war was the 1900 sedan. It was a huge car, at least for the time. It was heavy. But when the Giulietta came out, my father said, "This is the right car to go around the city," and he bought one. So to me and to us when we were kids, it was more fun than the other big car that to us was considered the car for long travels when we went on holiday. This model is by Axel Mars, who is outside because he's a member of the jury today. The color to me is beautiful. It was one of those pastel colors of the 50s. And I don't know why Alfa Romeo is waiting to re-offer this model. Blue Cobalto Medio was the official name. It's beautiful, but thanks for this car. This car will go to the museum exhibition. And before talking about a car that Emanuele knows very well, I'd like to say something about what happened to Alfa Romeo. So, before the war, they produced 220, 250 cars per year. They realized that Giulietta could be produced in hundreds per day. So, Rudolf Ruska was hired to increase the production in the before the war period. He rethought the Volkswagen plant, and he created a plant that was able to produce 1,000 cars per day. So he was the perfect man to build a factory which could produce finally a mass production of cars for Alfa Romeo. Once the Giulietta Sprint was produced, Max Hoffmann, the California importer of the European sports brand, requested to have a roadster Giulietta, open, light, streamlined for the FCCA races. Alfa Romeo once again hires Bertone and Pininfarina. They presented two different prototypes with two different philosophies, but in the end Pininfarina won, and he was the designer and the builder of this work of art. But this is my Giulietta Spider, so it's hard for me to talk about the Giulietta Spider in general. It was not born with me, but when I was the first year of university, I bought it, so it's been a long time. I did everything with this car. I bought it when I was 19, I went to the Stelvio, I played with it in Riccione. I played the extra in a movie called Sabato, Domenica e Venerdì with Adriano Celentano. So, as years went by, thanks to the Giulietta, I also, well, the Giulietta contributed also to the fact that my wife today is here and she's sitting in the car because we went to the seaside when she was my girlfriend with this car, and when it rained I stopped and I wiped the car dry, and she thought I was crazy, but I couldn't see my car dirty. And then she started to come to the rear when she was 20, and now she's here with me. But apart from the personal aspect, the Giulietta Spider, to me, it was wonderful. I thank my car every day because it's a car that brought me closer to the Alfa world. When I bought it, I was a very young university student. My father didn't know anything about this. My grandfather was a Fiat dealer, and I couldn't bring it to the dealer because a lot of smoke was emitted by this car. So I did everything to restore it, but then I thank it because I got a member of Rear. I spent my life in Rear, and the Alfa Romeo brand is my heart. So I have a personal memory of this car as well. Since I'm quite old, I had one car, this model, in the red color. I was a young student at the Zurich Polytechnic. I bought it together with my brother working at the post office for Christmas, and we could buy a 1600, a Giulia, with this red color, so I drove it. Thank you for bringing it here. I hope it was not too embarrassing. So, today we're not only presenting the cars, we're also saying something about the milestones. And one of the milestones is concerning the 750 competition. So one, not the only attempt that Alfa Romeo did to enter the sports category up to 1.5 liter was done with these cars. So the starting base of the Giulietta was brought to the limits to 1488. The distribution was changed up to 148 power horses with a very sports attitude, racing attitude. But the chassis was an open point. So at that moment, Alfa Romeo collaborated, among others, with Carlo Abarth, who had a deep relationship with Mr. Rushka. So Carlo Abarth offered to design a tubular chassis, an extremely light chassis, originating the very low barchetta, which fitted perfectly the mechanics and engine of the Giulietta. So this chassis arrived at Alfa Romeo. After the first test, they realized that it was light but too flexible. So Alfa Romeo itself started to reinforce the chassis by stiffening it, but also losing part of the lightness. So the performance was anyway good. The bodywork was given to Boano, who originated to this barchetta, which basically never went on the racetrack. So one model and a half only were left. So one was is this one for the museum, and the other one is only made up of the chassis and is also part of the museum. And now it participates to many events. But the race tracks were in the DNA of the brand. The Giulietta Sprint was used to race, but against the competitors, it was clear Alfa needed something stronger. So they had a lightened and more complex Giulietta, the so-called Giulietta Sprint Veloce, which is very similar to a Sprint, but also has many differences. Well, the pre-series which I had, which belonged to a Sicilian count, well, he bought the Giulietta Coupé because the Veloce didn't exist. When the Veloce came out, he bought it, but the Veloce was a step forward, more horsepower, lighter, faster, and it won many races. Competing against Porsche 356, it was a hard battle because also Porsche cars were very fast, and they were competing in the Mille Miglia. It was a car that all the gentlemen's drivers and sportsmen who could afford it liked to buy. It was parts in aluminum, a bigger reservoir, even the fenders were in aluminum. So if the owner wants to tell us a couple of words, we would be happy to listen. Thank you to the officials of REAR and Alfa Romeo for this opportunity and for this honor. This machine has already been described, so we shouldn't start again talking about the mechanical characteristics, but the specific history of this car is based on its color, which at the time was called, I believe, Blue Bertone, and it was called also Blue Francia, Blue France, because it was the color of the French racing cars. So, and maybe you don't know that in certain parts of Europe this is called Blue Sweden, because when this car came out, the Prince of Sweden ordered one of this color because this is the background color of the Swedish flag. Maybe I told you something you didn't know, and I'm happy. So, like 10 years ago, I was able to own this car. The first Giulietta which I owned was a first series sedan, like the one that we saw before, and I still remember the joy of my father when he brought it to the mountains that summer. I was 8. My mother was not so enthusiastic, and calling it the girlfriend of the Italians was not a great idea if you think about the women, the two wives of my family, so my mother and my wife, were kind of jealous of the car. But to wrap it up, this car was bought by its first owner, who was from Morocco, from Casablanca, and he bought it in this color because it was racing in France and in Morocco. And then it passed down to 2, 3 other owners. It's a very international car. And from my point of view, well, I adore it, I cherish it, because it reminds me of a very nice period of my life. And it is a car, it's a pleasure to drive it. I don't know if those who are here have ever driven it, but compared to a normal Giulietta, as an English magazine wrote at the time, it is another beast. It accelerates, it brakes way better than the others. So, for those who drive it, it is true what is written on the leaflet, which I still keep, and it was photographed in Cortina in front of my house, the pleasure of owning an Alfa Romeo. So the first thing I would say is the pleasure that they give if you own them. Thank you.
Grazie mille.
Thank you. And the Sprint Veloce, which was born to satisfy the requests of the sports customers who wanted a more effective car against the competitors, also obtained one of the most important results, the 11th place at the Mille Miglia in 1957, but a 1300 at the 11th place, coming after cars that raced at 300 kilometers per hour, was very important and significant, and this is just one of the many victories that the Giulietta Sprint Veloce obtained in its career. But unfortunately, also for the Giulietta Sprint Veloce, some obstacles appeared, and at one point the Priolo brothers, having a Giulietta that took part to the Mille Miglia and was broken, decided to ask Zagato to recreate the body of their work, which not only changed the bodywork but also the structure, the chassis, and obtained what was in the beginning only a privately modified car. So unofficially, the Giulietta Sprint Veloce Zagato. So the Priolo brothers obtained good results, and the requests of similar modifications arrived very soon. So Alfa Romeo realized that they had to do a further step forward in the elaboration of the cars, and looking at the American market, even though they would never race at Sebring, they built the 750G, so a very elaborated model with a more elaborated mechanics and single-seater, a version of the Giulietta Spider. Very few models were built, 24, and some of these were changed even more to race for Alfa Romeo. So they obtained a few wins, and we end today a Giulietta Sebring
nell'ambito di una
and
collaborazione con i carrozzieri costruita anche in una
another
versione giapponese
Giardinetta
che è
version
disegnata
called
Promisqua, in
Promisqua
quanto
was created together with
poteva,
the
come da
bodywork
da carta di
creators
circolazione, era un
because it
unico
has
flusso
a
merci e
mixed use,
passeggeri,
goods and people.
è un'elaborazione che
And
finisce
this
più o meno
a
sulla versione
model
ufficiale,
went
anzi
on
più o
the
meno sulla versione ufficiale, e
official
che testimonia
catalog
una storia che
and
qui non è
testifies of
raccontata
a
perché sarebbe
history
troppo vasta, cioè le
that we
varie
cannot tell
vetture elaborate dai
today, which
carrozzieri.
is the
La prima Promisqua
different
che
cars
è
elaborated by the
costruita dalla
bodyworks. The
carrozzeria Colli,
first
ma
one
che
was
saranno anche
created by
costruite da altri
Colli, but
carrozzieri.
other body
Sempre
work
portando avanti la logica di gamma,
experts
le
created
Giulietta
others. So
500 viene
always
presentata
following
la Giulietta
this
T,
logic, the
che
Giulietta
è
T was
una
presented
evoluzione
afterwards, which was an evolution
che
of the
senza
Giulietta
diciamo
sedan
profonde
without
differenze dal punto di
big
vista
differences from the point
della
of view
carrozzeria e nemmeno dal punto di
of
vista della
the
meccanica, ma con un
bodywork
carburatore
and
doppio corpo, con
mechanics,
una generale messa a punto di tutta la vettura che ne fa
with changes
un'automobile molto più
which made it a
utilizzabile,
more
più
international
funzionale, più
car, more
matura
mature
e che
car, and
porterà la
usable
storia della
car,
Giulietta a
and
lungo.
that will
Arriviamo
would last
invece alla
long.
vettura che
And
stavamo
then
aspettando perché era qui
this
davanti,
is
che
the
attendeva
car
da un
that we have in
po',
front
la
of us, the
Giulietta Sprint
Giulietta Sprint
Speciale.
Speciale.
Sempre in un'ottica di
Always in view
dare
of
ai tipi
giving
sportivi
sports
una
clients
versione più
a
spinta
stronger version of the
della
Giulietta
Sprint
Sprint
Veloce,
Veloce.
di nuovo a
Again,
Bertone viene
Bertone is
commissionata
asked
una
to
carrozzeria
create
basata sul
a
passo corto
bodywork
molto
based on a short
aerodinamica. Questo
wheelbase
scaglione applica
with
molte dei
aerodynamic
principi, delle teorie che
elements.
erano a bordo
Scaglione elaborates
della sua
principles
arte,
of his heart
per avere una
to have
vettura
a
molto
very
bassa,
low,
stirata, molto
elongated
allungata,
car,
che almeno
which
nella sua
at least
versione
in its
prototipo addirittura non
prototype
aveva lo
didn't
specchio
have the
alfa, tanto
Alpha
voleva essere
crest
pura
because it
nelle sue
wanted
forme.
to
La
have the
vettura è
purest form.
velocissima,
The car
ma
was
ben
very fast,
presto
but
ci si
soon
rende conto in Alfa Romeo
Alfa
che
Romeo
questa
realized
non
that
è
it
la
was not
vettura
the
perfetta per
perfect
le
car
gare, perché
for
tutto
races
sommato è una
because in the
carrozzeria
end
molto
it
ingombrante,
was
molto
very
allungata,
chunky,
con
very
poche strutture,
elongated,
nonostante abbia la
even
versione
though
di
the
punta e
peak
UCX
speed
estremamente
and
valido.
CX was extremely valid, but
Ironicamente,
ironically,
dopo la
after
presentazione del
presentation
prototipo,
of the
diciamo senza
prototype
bandiera,
without
senza
crest and
scudetto,
without flag,
Alfa Romeo
Alfa Romeo
presenta la
presents
versione di
the final
produzione
production
allineandone
version,
molte tutte
uh,
uguali, quasi a
aligning
sottolineare il
many of
fatto che
them
la Giulietta Sprint
to
Speciale non
underline the fact
doveva
that
essere
Giulietta
una
Serie
lavorazione
Speciale
mirata come era per la
shouldn't be
versione Sprint Veloce
like
200,
the
ma al
Zagato
contrario voleva
version,
essere un
but
prodotto
it
ufficiale perfettamente
wanted to
listino
be
e un
a
prodotto
catalog product,
se non
official
industriale
product,
ma
maybe not
certamente
industrial,
fatto in
but
serie.
a model
Emanuele, hai
which
qualcosa da
was
aggiungere su
made in
questa
series.
vettura?
Emanuele, do you want to add something?
Io questa vettura non
I
l'avevo
never
posseduta
owned this
però
car,
fin
but
da ragazzino rispetto
since I
alla
was a
Sprint
kid,
o alla Spider faceva
compared
un
to the
certo
Sprint
effetto, no?
or Spider,
Anche perché all'epoca
well,
credo che costasse anche
it,
già come vettura
it
da
was very nice
collezione
because
di
it
più
was
delle
more
Spider
expensive than the
e delle
Spider
Sprint, per
and
cui
the Sprints.
diciamo non
So,
mi sono mai avvicinato perché
as
da
a
studente
student,
già facevo fatica a
it,
mettere
it,
insieme la
it
mia
was hard
Spiderina, questa qui
to buy the
era un po'
Spider for
importante.
me, and this
A
was
vederla
out of
oggi
my
è una
league.
vettura
So,
incredibile, poi l'ho
seeing it
guidata
today, it's
chiaramente
incredible.
più
Then I
volte
drove
sia
it
sia la
many times
versione
in its
jetpack che la versione
1300 version
Giulia,
and in the Giulia version.
perché è
It's a
una bella
beautiful
macchina che ha
car
avuto
who
dopo
had among the
l'insediamento un
collectors
incremento di
an
valore
increase of
enorme,
value,
è arrivata a valori forse doppi, forse quasi, se
maybe
non doppi
doubled
di una
the value of
Spider
a
o di una
Spider.
Sprint. Poi a me le macchine di scaglione
And
piacciono,
then I
tutte,
like
quindi
the
questa
cars
qui
of Scaglione,
è
all of them.
sicuramente
This
un
is a work of
capolavoro.
art.
Secondo me la prima presentata è ancora più
So
rara
the
di
first one,
queste,
which was
era
presented,
senza
even
il
more
paraurti
rare,
anteriore,
without a
con
front
il
fender,
muso molto,
with a
molto
very
basso
low
abbassato,
front,
era una macchina come
was
che
a
faceva
car
Scaglione
like
bellissima.
Scaglione
Questa poi è
did
entrata in
them, which was
produzione,
beautiful.
una
Then
macchina
it
molto
started to be
elegante,
produced. It
ma ha
was
perso
very
un po' di
elegant,
quella
but it lost
grinta
some
incredibile che
of
aveva
the
quando è stata presentata.
strength it had when it was
Questa
presented.
vettura che
This car, which
la proprietà delle Fontana di
is owned by the Fontana family,
la seconda volta che
actually
al museo perché nel 2015
was here
all'inaugurazione
in
del museo
2015 when
rinnovato,
we
in
inaugurated
attesa di
the
avere pronta la Giulia Sprint Speciale
Rivan
per la
Museum.
collezione, per
So
qualche
for a
mese
few
proprio
months,
qui
this car
era stata esposta nella
was
sezione
exhibited
bellezza, per cui insomma non
in the
benvenuta,
beauty
ma
section. So
bentornata
welcome
questa
back to this
vettura.
beautiful car.
a queste 5 vetture
So we've seen 5 cars so far. We have a sixth one, which for logistics reasons we cannot have here, and it is a beautiful Giulietta Sprint in light green that is on the revolving pedestal at the entrance of the museum, but it deserves a round of applause. And if we continue the history, well, another milestone is the Giulietta SZ, because once the private elaboration was ended, because the more orders Zagato got, the better could intervene, but Alfa Romeo understood that there was a potential in that and started to put the Giulietta SZ on the official catalog of the brand. So Zagato could work freely on this, and there was a car which was born, and it is the Giulietta Sprint Zagato Giulietta SZ. So in this period, Alfa Romeo also starts another collaboration, in this case not with a body work maker, but with the fashion designer Iole Veneziani. Iole Veneziani didn't see her name become a brand, but in the 50s she was one of the most sought after designers of the Milan scene, and Alfa Romeo thought that what we could call today contamination between the fashion world and the automobile world could be a success. So they made an agreement with the Iole Veneziani not only to present some cars together with the collections of dresses, but also to change the colors, the inside of the car, so a color palette was created by Iole Veneziani, as we would say today. So it was a very modern attitude, a visionary attitude for a brand which wanted to change pace also from the communication point of view. So from being a technical product, as Alfa Romeo had been for many years, it was the builder of the best automobiles in the world, but this was evident in the races especially, trying to attract an audience which was not only interested in the performances but also in the role that the car had in a society. And also the name was important because for the first time Giulietta had a girl's name, as Sinisgalli said, an engineer and poet who was consultant for communication at Alfa Romeo at the time. And it was the first Italian car to have a girl's name. So Alfa Romeo built around this name a series of storytelling. The most widespread, told by Giampaolo Garcia, who was one of the main designers of Alfa Romeo, is inspired by a French restaurant where a Russian expat arrived during a dinner with several technicians of Alfa Romeo in Paris and said, "You're 8 Romeos, the Juliet is missing." So Sinisgalli apparently says that Giorgio de Crusandier, his wife, came back from the restroom and said, "I'm here, I'm the Juliet." So this is a legend, but it's not only a legend from Alfa Romeo, but it was this storytelling of the Prince Alessio, of his 2 greyhounds, is also told in a movie, La Cambiale by Carmelo Castro Cinque from the 50s, and there's a scene that depicts that dinner. But whatever the reality or the truth, calling a car with a girl's name after 50 years of calling it with letters, numbers, or names linked to a sports victory was a very strong message that Alfa Romeo brought about on many fronts, because the Giulietta was given to actors, to singers. It was presented in spectacular ways. It was linked for the movies. It became the official car of Miss Italia. Brunella Tocci, Miss Italia in 1955, is present in one of the pictures that you see here, and even dolls of Romeo and Juliet were created that they wanted to give with the car, but then this didn't happen. And so one of the most interesting things that happened was a competition in 1957 to choose colors and the internal details of the car. So anyone could ride on one of these cars, their preference, and the winners would have won a car made with those characteristics. So here is one of those many cards that were collected during that initiative. And all is part of the communication initiative, which was very original and visionary. And that's also why the Giulietta immediately entered the hearts of the fans and one of the few series cars to be collected. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid that I saw the image of the Quattro Ruote cover, top left, which I found beautiful, and it is still beautiful. And that car became famous because it was stolen. So there was a story between Julie Redding and a hotel which had the car in the garage. It was in California. So it was a real car made for Julie Redding, was a very famous actress at the moment. And for the collectors, today we talk about the 70 years of the Giulietta, but the relationship between Alfa Romeo Museum and Rear dates back to 30 years ago. Yes, every 10 years, I'm 10 years older. We had a big celebration for the 60 years. Now it's a celebration for the 70 years. I hope to be here for the 80 years. Okay, that was not the spirit of my hint, but okay, we had already talked about this a few backstages ago, but the Giulietta was also the first engine which was officially prepared to be used on boats. So there were preparators like Raineri and others preparing it for races, but then at one point, by seeing the characteristics of this reliable engine, which could withstand also high and low temperatures, the Priolo sisters, whose company was called Lesco and dealt with marine engines, decided to take an engine of the Giulietta to create another version called Giulietta del Mare and create an engine for motorboats. So there were 6-7 producers which produced motorboats with the Giulietta engines, but also the spare parts of these motorboats were directly deriving from those of the cars. Giulietta went on till there was a second series, the range was renewed, and they went from the old code 750, which originated in an era when the CCs were unsure, maybe 750, so it entered with a new standardization of Alfa at the end of the 50s, so they started it with the 1 and the second series of Giulietta. Soon after, also the Giulietta SZ did a step forward, and the truncated back, the Coda Tronca version, was presented. And this element became one of the fundamental elements of Alfa Romeo. And thanks to the performances at a maximum speed, which was increased by almost 30 kilometers per hour, and the Giulietta SZ with the truncated back became also the car which was used as an example of the press campaign of Giulia, which 1 year and a half later was presented with a truncated back, and the audience struggled a little bit to accept it, but the example brought by the increase in performances given by the race version offered a great example and explanation also for the normal audience. And by following our exhibition, we arrived to the point of the retirement of the Giulietta, but Alfa Romeo was not ready to do that immediately because Giulietta still had its funds. Giulia was more expensive, bigger, heavier. So on one side, the Giulietta sedan remained in the production together with the Giulia TI, but on the other side, the Coupe, Sprint, Spider, and Sprint Speciale versions waiting to be modified, like the Giulia Sprint GT for the Coupe, the Duetto for the Spider, and the other Giulia Sprint Speciale offerings of new generation didn't see the light. Well, the Giulia Sprint, Giulia Spider, and Giulia Sprint Speciale saw the light, which were a revised version of the old mechanics of the Giulietta. Yes, and normally, yes, for the fans that know everything, well, they call it Giulia Spider, but for years, everybody called it the Giulietta 1600. Very few, well, today, yes, there are people who call it Giulia Spider, but usually everybody called it in another way. But it was not the case because, as Lorenzo said, the Spider, the Duetto was not ready. That's why they did the Giulia 1600. It was a performing car, which offered a good image of the Giulietta with mechanics that had better performances compared to the 1300. I also had one of these, but having two shoes, when I decided to keep just one, I decided to keep the Giulietta, and I sold the Giulia. Okay, it was nice, but maybe the air inlet, the mirrors, it was too modern. And next to the 1600 engine versions, the Giulietta Sprint continued to be produced with the 1300 engine, but losing the Giulietta name because Alfa Romeo in the 50s, 60s and 70s, when presenting a new range, maintaining some elements, cancelled the original name, just like the GT Junior, which lost the Giulia name. So for 1 year and a half, the Giulietta Sprint 1300 continued to be produced with the 1300 Sprint name next to the Giulia Sprint. And talking about sprint and speed, today we went very fast, but the core of the day was not the backstage, but a celebration around the anniversary that we're celebrating today. We have a second museum today outside on the racetrack. I don't want to steal time to all of you. I know you want to enjoy the day. The cars that we saw today and the stories that we share with you will be also detailed in the exhibition that will be hosted by this museum. I'd like to thank Ermanno for being here with us and contributing to make it a beautiful day. I'd like to thank Emanuele for his collaboration, and I thank, of course, all the collectors who offered their cars and the audience, which is the most enthusiastic and important part. Have a nice day, also from Ria. Thank you.